Hello, everyone. Today we are talking with our great host, Gabriel Lugo, about session number 26. Welcome, Gabriel.
Hello, Daniel, everybody who's watching on YouTube. We are definitely getting into session 26, which is a sort of milestone for those who remember the original books, which is 5 books. And for those who are used to the raw contact, then this is just half of the first volume. So this is actually a good distinction to make for us who are a bit nerdy about the versions and materials, because if memory serves, the last question here, which has to do with sexual energy transfer, was actually moved to session 32 or 33, maybe 31, somewhere around there. And other things were moved and shifted in the original books, but now we're going to read it all as it is in the raw context. So even though we're finishing, in theory, the first book of the original series of 5, we are actually covering a question that wasn't in the original books. So that's just me wanting to be thorough. Kind of long session, but we have short answers. I'm actually going to skip the first 3 because they are about maintaining the contact itself. And we can start with question number 4, which is going to bring us to, it's actually a very interesting question about the law of one and the disseminating of the law of one. I'll give my interpretation as I usually do, and that's just my general view of things. But yeah, so here, Don, and again, also another milestone, if you want to see it this way, is that Don is finishing his line of questions starting from session 18, 19, when he started at the beginning of the cycle and wanting to move. I'm talking about the master cycle of 75,000 years, and he wanted to move through it all the way to the end, which is current era, this 1981 time when the channeling was done. So that's why Don in question 4 says, we are down to the last 3,000 years of this present cycle. And I was wondering if the law of one in either written or spoken form has been made available within this past 3,000 years in any complete way, such as we are doing now. Is it available in any other source? And Ross says there is no possibility of a complete source of information of the law of one in this density. However, certain of your writings passed to you as your so-called holy works have portions of this law. So I'm not entirely sure what Don meant by um, the law of one being given in written or spoken form. Because to me, the law of one is just another way of using words to speak about the nature of reality, the fundamental nature of reality, which is an undeniable oneness, an undeniable not separateness, non-dual nature of reality. And so to say that, this has been given as if it is some sort of, teaching or particular format, it's misleading, and it's okay. Obviously, I'm not criticizing Don, but that's why Ross says that first, there is no possibility of a complete source of information of the law of one in this density. I wouldn't even say that it's possible in other densities, but Ra may know better. I just don't think we can fathom this. Uh, but again, they do say that it is present in some of our so-called holy works, and it is, of course, in all these texts, we find bits and pieces of it because we do speak about the nature of oneness in many texts and materials. So Don goes a little bit more specific and says, does the Bible, as we know it, have portions of this law in it? Ross says that this is correct. Don says, can you tell me if the Old Testament has any of the law of one? And Ross says, this is correct. And Don says, which has more of the law of one in it, the Old Testament or the New Testament? And Ra says, withdrawing from each of the collections of which you speak the portions having to do with the law of one, the content is approximately equal. However, the so-called Old Testament has a larger amount of negatively influenced material, as you would call it. And so Don says, can you tell me about what percentage is Orion influence in both the Old and New Testaments? And Ra says, we prefer that this be left to the discretion of those who seek the law of one. We are not speaking in order to judge. Such statements would be construed by some of those who may read this material as judgmental. We can only suggest a careful reading and inward digestion of the contents. The understandings will become obvious. So this makes total sense. We humans can possibly debate this and say this is negative, this is not, and whatever. I think interpretation is always leading to it's straying away from what we're seeking in terms of, its pure essence. But especially Ra, they are pretty much aware that because we humans have a tendency, and they kind of realize this, to idolize something that seems to have a higher intelligence. Like we see Ra as an entity, and so they possess a higher intelligence, right? Which to me is it's partially wrong to see it that way. Then they know that if they give this information, saying, this percentage or that percentage would be kind of just misleading, and it's just not good ethics, let's say. I would say it that way. It's not good cosmic ethics to say that. Question 11, I'm skipping a couple of these because they're not relevant. Don's question really is, has Ra communicated with any of our population in this century in the last 80 years? And Ra says, we have not. Question 12 now. Don says, has the law of one been communicated within the past 80 years by any source or any other source to an entity in our population? Ra says, the ways of one have seldom been communicated, although there are rare instances in the previous 80 of your years as you measure time. There have been many communications from fourth density due to the drawing towards the harvest to fourth density. These are the ways of universal love or understanding. The other teachings are reserved for those whose depth of understanding, if you will excuse the misnomer, recommend and attract such further communication. This is a sort of leitmotif in Ra's vocabulary every time they use, or almost every time they use the word understanding in this way, they say that it's a misnomer or just not very accurate to say that we understand. Um, so we get a glimpse as to the changes in consciousness for the past 80 years. Don's question is about the law of one being communicated in the past 80 years, and they say seldom has been so. Um, and they do mention that what has happened is more communication from fourth density. And this kind of makes sense if we look at, say, the last century, because that's what he was talking about, 1900 to 1981. And the many channelings that started happening, and this whole phenomenon. And it makes sense because I like to put it this way. Fourth density is a sort of, well, they say it's a vibration, so it's a sort of music. And so our minds are the bodies to that music. And if the music gets louder and louder, then it starts to substitute like a DJ mixing music, right? You start to stop listening to the other one and the other one builds in. That's how third or fourth density would kind of overlap in my analogy here. And so the more we start listening, those who start listening to the faint beginning music, they can understand it, and then that can be transmitted. That's why I would see that there is a this phenomenon of more channelings and people, even without channeling, because channeling is just a form of providing or expressing information that is readily available in our minds. So everybody really is channeling all the time, if we see it that way. It's just that there we like to measure things as humans, and so we call that a channeling and that not a channeling. But in the the grand scheme of things, it's just a vibration of understanding. There's a consciousness, we can call it a higher frequency of consciousness that it's becoming more available, and so we see this, and that's what I believe Ra is referring to here, because it's a measurable phenomenon over, the last decades. We still carry a lot of, uh, just to play with this, I like to see that um, humanity is still listening to the echoes of third density, even though fourth density it's already playing really hard. But we just listen to the echoes of that in our minds, and you know, people who dance to fourth density, they're seen like, "What are you crazy? Where's that music coming from? I don't hear it." Um, but yeah, it's becoming more obvious. We can go on a tangent here, but it explains a lot the changes and the quantum leaps and all these words that we talk about, just how obvious it is, this is the truth and it's coming out. So question 13, Don says, did the Confederation then set up its program of, am I in the right question? Yes, I am. To set up this program of helping planet Earth sometime late in this last major cycle. It seems that they did from the previous data, especially with the Industrial Revolution. Can you tell me the attitudes and reasonings behind this setup? Is there any reason other than they just wanted to produce more leisure time in the last, say, 100 years of the cycle? Is this the total reason? So there's a little bit of old information that we had here. This is when they talked about Tesla and wanting to free humanity from darkness, which metaphorically sounds like there's the metaphysical darkness, but no, it was actually physical darkness, which is, free energy. We have free energy, then my God, what a different world. So that's what Don is referring to here, to get more leisure time. That was the conclusion that Ra suggested, that it would give a um, it would just free our time instead of working for energy, paying for energy, and so on. So was that the total reason? Why was this happening 200 years ago? And Ross says this is not the total reason. Approximately 200 of your years in the past, as you measure time, there began to be a significant amount of entities who, by seniority, were incarnating for learned teaching purposes rather than for the lesser of the learned teachings of those less aware of the process. This was our signal to enable communication to take place. Pause here. First paragraph. Uh, Summary. Ending the cycle means that the way I see it, there is a sort of assessment, right, as a collective. I don't want to say entities in particular, but let's just say the consciousness of the planet contains certain mind, body, spirit complexes or thought patterns. And these thought patterns some are more congruent with four density, others not. This can be a little bit complicated, but it's the amount of these, and I guess that's why we use humans as a reference. Um, all those humans that were closer to fourth density were given priority to incarnate, that so that they would have a chance. And that's happening, or at least it was happening in 1981 more and more, um, because it was coming to a close, right? Third density was coming to a close. And so what we find is that those mind, body, spirit complexes that were a little bit more closer to graduation were giving that priority, and that's what is called seniority by vibration. So that's what they refer to here. And it started happening 200 years ago or so. So that would be 1781. Um, Second paragraph of question 13. Ra continues, and again, this is the reason why there was more communication and information being given. Ra says, the wanderers which came among you began to make themselves felt at approximately this time. Firstly, offering ideas or thoughts containing the distortion of free will. This was the prerequisite for further wanderers which had information of a more specific nature to offer. The thought must precede the action. Okay, we can unpack this one pretty easy. So, wanderers also were here, and from what I can gather here, they're saying that the wanderers that were here, they began to express themselves a little bit more. So we're talking about um, the Enlightenment era, right? We had also freedom from empire later on, slavery, all of these changes. We're talking about approximately 200 years ago. So these changes started happening dramatically, and that makes a lot of sense. Why? Because the information being there, that's why they say the thought must precede the action. So the thought was already seated in the minds of all these seniority by vibration, those who are of a higher frequency nature, whatever you want to call them, just closer to fourth density, and also the wanderers who also contain obviously a database, if you will, of truth and the mirroring of that truth through whatever means their mind configuration at the time could do it. Question 15, Don asks specifically, wondering if the one, Abraham Lincoln, could have possibly been a wanderer. And Ross says this is incorrect. This entity was a normal, shall we say, Earth being, which chose to leave the vehicle and allow an entity to use it on a permanent basis. This is relatively rare compared to the phenomenon of wanderers. You would do better considering the incarnations of wanderers, such as the one known as Thomas, the one known as Benjamin. Uh, Tangential topic here, which I won't get into, but Lincoln apparently his mind body spirit complex left and allowed what I think I've heard called a walk, WALK in. I don't know. I don't know much about that, but that's what I've heard. Um, and then just to skip the next question, they were talking about Thomas Jefferson and not Thomas Edison and Benjamin Franklin, of course. Don says, thank you. Can you tell me where the entity that used Lincoln Abraham's body, what density he came from and where? Ra says, this entity was fourth vibration, positive. I assume positive, says Don. That is correct, says Ra. Was his assassination in any way influenced by Orion or any other negative force? Don asks, and Ra says this is correct. Question 20 now. Don says, thank you. In the recent past of the last 30 to 40 years, the UFO phenomena has become known to our population. What was the original reason for, he pauses and says, I know there have been UFOs throughout history, but what was the original reason for the increase in what we call UFO activity, say, in the past 40 years? So from the 40s to the 80s, beginning early 80s. Ross says information which Confederation sources had offered to your entity, Albert Einstein, became perverted and instruments of destruction began to be created. Examples of this being the Manhattan Project and its product. Information offered through Wanderer, sound vibration Nikola Tesla, also being experimented with for potential destruction. Example, your so-called Philadelphia experiment. Thus, we felt a strong need to involve our thought forms in whatever way we of the Confederation could be of service in order to balance these distortions of information meant to aid your planetary sphere. Once again, they felt that whatever gifts they gave, tools they provided were perverted and twisted for the use of destruction and manipulation. And so they decided to get involved. Now, why that way? I think Don's going to ask it. Don says, then what you did, I am assuming, then, is to create an air of mystery with the UFO phenomena, as we call it, and then by telepathy send many messages that could be either accepted or rejected under the pauses, following, of course, the law of one, so the population would start thinking seriously about the consequences of what they were doing. Is this correct? And Ross says, this is partially correct. There are other services we may perform. Firstly, the integration of souls or spirits, if you will, in the event of use of these nuclear devices in your space-time continuum. This the Confederation has already done. So Don is going to follow this initial question and understand a little bit more. What is that integration of souls or spirits? He says, I don't fully understand what you mean by that. Could you expand a little bit? Ross says, the use of intelligent energy transforming matter into energy, so nuclear uh, explosions, is of such a nature among these weapons that the transition from space-time, body, third density, to time-space, third density, so soul, dissolution, death, or what you may call your heaven worlds, is interrupted in many cases. So that transition of death. Therefore, we are offering ourselves as those who continue the integration of soul or spirit complex during transition from space-time to time-space. And Don wants to inquire further and says, could you please give me an example from, let us say, Hiroshima or Nagasaki of how this is done? Ra says, those who were destroyed not by radiation, which is the aftermath, but by the trauma of the energy release, so the initial impact and explosion, found not only the body-mind-spirit complex made unviable, but also a disarrangement of that unique vibratory complex you have called the spirit complex, which we understand as a mind-body-spirit complex, to be completely disarranged without possibility of reintegration. This would be the loss to the creator of part of the creator, and thus we were given permission not to stop the events, but to ensure the survival of the, shall we say, disembodied mind-body-spirit complex. This we did, this we did in those events which you mentioned, losing no spirit or portion or holograph or microcosm of the macrocosmic infinite one. I would probably add my view here, especially this can be misinterpreted and in the direction of worry or drama, fear. I'm not sure what word to use here. When they say that this would be the loss to the creator of part of the creator. This is not obviously congruent. I'm not saying that Ra is wrong here, but it's just that it could use some clarification, which wasn't followed up and understandable. It just doesn't seem to be something you want to go further. I would, but because this is not congruent with infinity. So the creator, being infinite, cannot lose a portion of itself. Makes no sense. However, if we interpret it in the sense that the cosmic mind maybe loses that somehow because it's dissolved, I'm not even sure how this can happen, but we can use our minds, how we can forget something seemingly forever. So I don't know. There's something that could be expanded more. I know this is not probably the time and place to do it, but yeah, I don't think this is the creator doesn't lose a part of itself. It's just that can be possibly, as Ross says, the solve disarranged in a way that it'll lose that continuity. Um, and so it's just an experience that, just ended there. And that's it. We're going to skip question 24. Oh, no, we don't. Don says, tell me just vaguely how you accomplish this. Ross says, this is accomplished through our understanding of dimensional fields of energy. The higher or more dense energy field will control the less dense. So this is the mechanism by which they save, in essence, the mind, body, spirit complex, the continuity of that mind, we would say. Don says, but then in general, then you're saying that if we, pauses, you will allow Earth, the population of this planet, to have a nuclear war and many deaths from that war, but you will be able to create a condition where these deaths will be no more traumatic, shall I say, with respect to entrance to the heaven world or astral world or whatever we call it, than death by a bullet or normal means of dying of old age. Is this correct? So the question is a little bit uh, muddied. It's he's asking if the the saving from this death would be less traumatic than normal or common death by being shot or dying of old age. But Ross says this is incorrect. It would be more traumatic. However, the entity would remain an entity. So they're saving, in essence, what I would call the continuity of that mind complex. Yes, that's basically what it is, in my view. Don says, can you tell me the condition of the entities who were, shall I say, killed in Nagasaki and Hiroshima? At this time, what is their condition? Ra says, they of this trauma have not yet fully begun the healing process. They are being helped as much as is possible. So that was almost 40 years after that. So we have a reference from, I think it was General Patton. I don't know if we covered that already, where he died and he was able to reincarnate. I don't think they gave it time, but it seems like that healing process took some time. But then we got Hitler too, who I think was still in the process of healing at that time. So if we get that as a reference, then we can see that they haven't even begun or begin the healing process. Yeah, that's a good reference. Don says, when the healing process is complete with these entities, will this experience of the death due to the nuclear bomb cause them to be, shall we say, regressed in their climb toward the fourth density? Ross says, such actions as nuclear destruction affect the entire planet. There are no differences at this level of destruction, and the planet will need to be healed. I like this view. It's about the planetary consciousness. We all derive our minds from it. So there's no individual healing. There's always a collective healing. Question 28, Don says, I was thinking specifically if an entity was in Hiroshima or Nagasaki at that time, and he was reaching harvestability at the end of our cycle, would this death by nuclear bomb possibly create such trauma that he would not be able to be harvestable at the end of the cycle? That was specifically my question. And Ross says, this is incorrect. Once the healing has taken place, the harvest may go forth unimpeded. However, the entire planet will undergo healing for this action. No distinction being made betwixt victim and aggressor. This due to damage done to the planet. So again, the planets will go through this healing regardless. And it's not about the specific entity. And I'm not sure if Ra responded to Don's question, or maybe I'm not sure if maybe I'm interpreting Don's question to be if they were close to being harvested and let's just say they were 48, 49%, 50%, not 51%, and they die there and they have to heal, then my understanding would be that yes, they would have to repeat their density and not be harvested because they couldn't reach that point. I think that's what Don wanted to ask, but Ross said that obviously they're going to be harvested, but if they harvested doesn't mean that you go to full density. It means that everything goes where it should go, where it belongs. But it could be me thinking that Don wanted to ask that. Question 30. Don says, and then can you describe the mechanism of the planetary healing? I love this. Probably one of my favorite answers here. Ross says healing is a process of acceptance, forgiveness, and, if possible, restitution. The restitution not being available in time space, there are many among your peoples now attempting restitution while in the physical. This is applicable to us every single day, every single second, and we should probably emphasize this more in our lives, I would say, because healing is, I'm going to give my 2 cents here, my view. The process of healing at the beginning seems to be individual or something. It starts from within. So I think that's why we call it, it's still appropriate to call it healing, but the process of healing first is a liberation of many of the things that are stuck. I like to call it unprocessed experiences, which show up as emotions. And the more we heal by the process of accepting the experience, which hasn't been processed, forgiving, or probably a better word is letting go of it, because it's still stuck, right? So you let it go. And if possible, restitution. It's not necessary, but it's a good way to, kind of get good karma, if you will, which is not, it's not a medal or something that builds upon you, but just builds momentum in your desire to serve. That's the that's the future outcome of inner healing happening faster and faster, catalyzed. Because the more you heal, then that process of acceptance and forgiveness, which first is of our perceived self, right? Letting go of the mental image of ourselves, then we begin to let go at the same time, right? But more and more towards others. So the same thing. You begin to accept more situations, more people. You begin to let go of any image that might be invoked in your mind. I mean, many things start to happen on the outside, and that's what we call service, dharma, purpose, mission. All these words refer to one single inertia, which is unstoppable because you're not doing it. It's spontaneous, it's within you. So healing is it's a dynamic that is beautiful to taste and then indulge in forever because it'll never stop, providing um, that gift, that shining of truth to the world, to the universe. I could stay there for a while, but let's move. Question 31. Don says, how do these people attempt this restitution in the physical? Ross says, these attempts, feeling of love, these attempt feelings of love towards the planetary sphere and comfort and healing of the scars and the imbalances of these actions. This is a sort of natural response, and it's happening more and more. It's a little bit, it gets mocked sometimes because, well, our third density mind still is, holding holding on to old beliefs, but it's happening a lot more. The love and the caring for, um, I wouldn't say it's just the nature. Like nature is the most obvious, right? Like defending the ecosystem and all this. But it's about everything that is within the planet, people in particular. So this is happening. Question 32. Don says, then as the UFO phenomena was made obvious to many of the population, many groups of people reported contact. Many groups of people reported telepathic communication with UFO entities, and many recorded the results of what they considered telepathic communication. Was the Confederation, shall we say, oriented to impressing telepathic communication on groups that became interested in UFOs? Ross says this is correct, although some of our members have removed themselves from the time-space using thought-form projections into your space-time and have chosen from time to time, with permission of the Council, to appear in your skies without landing. Big leap of interpretation here, but hopefully it makes sense. The way I see this is that um, Confederation work is not it's not really a space-time phenomenon, right? It's just it needs to be projected for our conscious mind to perceive it. But it is through our minds that these things are happening. Um, this is contrary to our modern view of the world, which means that um, I see things because they're out there, and so they reach my eyesight. And there's actually a pretty cool study in, I think it's called intravision and extravision, like how people report that they see things. And this is done on regular people, little parentheses here. So I think I may get it wrong, but the premise is the same. Intravision, I think, is that you see things, like you say, I see things from, I light up things from my eyes, which is contrary to what we would think. And extravision is the common accepted, that light reaches my eye and then I see things. The vast majority of people apparently see or believe in intravision, right? Opposite to what we think uh, we would conceive of the world, right? Things are reaching my eye. So introvision, I think it's the word, might be the other, but most people believe that they are projecting things, and that's right. That checks in with our understanding of consciousness. I mean, the mystical understanding of consciousness, not the materialistic one. So why am I saying this? Because we are projecting everything from the mind. I don't think that's debatable or too debatable here. We know that everything that we see is through our minds. So in the same way, confederation work, which is done in time space, as they said, right, is they used to do time space thought form projections in our space time, right? The appearance and uh, communication, like contact, as Don was talking about. And now they just appear in the skies, which is a way of invoking the mysterious aspect of reality and all that jazz. So interesting things. Don says, then are all of the landings that have occurred, except for the landing when Eisenhower was contacted, are all of those landings of the Orion group or similar type groups? Don says, except for isolated instances of those of, shall we say, no affiliation? This is correct. Don says, is it necessary in each case for the entity who is contacted in one of these landings to be calling the Orion group, or do some of these entities come in contact with the Orion group even though they are not calling that group? So could it be random, or do they have to be calling the Orion group? And Ross says, you must plumb the depths of four density negative understanding. This is difficult for you. Once having reached third density space-time continuum, through your so-called windows of opportunity in the quarantine, these crusaders may plunder as they will. The results completely a function of the polarity of the, shall we say, witness, subject, or victim. This is due to the sincere belief of four density negative that to love self is to love all. That's so cute. Each each other self, which is thus either taught or enslaved, thus has a teacher which teaches love of self. Exposed to this teaching, it is intended that there be brought to fruition a harvest of fourth density negative, or self-serving mind, body, spirit complexes. Um, so I don't think I'm not sure if Ra answered Don's question about is it random or do they have to be calling? I think they talk more about the philosophy of the Orion group and also how um, they reach the planet's consciousness, let's say, through these so-called windows. And the result of this, so that's the reason. Maybe they just gave an explanation as to what's happening instead of answering if it's random or is it because it's not random and they don't have to call either, right? If they call, then they should, of course. I mean, that's their privilege. Nobody should stop that. That would be an infringement of free will. Um, but is it random? That's what Ra, I think, is explaining here, that once this happens, which, yes, there is a random occurrence in terms of the windows, the so-called windows of opening in the quarantine, then obviously the philosophy and the desire, the intent of the Orion group is to teach their philosophy, which is wholeheartedly, or I shouldn't say wholeheartedly, uh, non-heartedly um, considered by them to be, it's a it's an elite. We have to build an elite, and that's it. I think we've spoken enough about this, but this encapsulates once again the philosophy, the negative philosophy. Question 36. Don says, then I am assuming all of the UFO groups who were getting telepathic contact from the Confederation were, shall we say, high priority targets for the Orion Crusaders. And I would assume that a large percentage of them were, shall we say, had their information polluted then. Can you tell me, do you have any idea what percentage of these groups were heavily polluted by the Orion information? And if any of them were able to remain purely a Confederation channel? Ra says to give you this information would be to infringe upon the free will or confusion of some living. We can only ask each group to continue the relative effect of philosophy and your so-called specific information. It is not the specificity of the information which attracts negative influences. It is the importance placed upon it. Hmm. Big teaching there. This is why we iterate quite often when asked for specific information that it pales to insignificance, and forgive my emphasis there, but I feel like I need to do it. It pales to insignificance just as the grass withers and dies while the love and delight of the one infinite creator redounds to the very infinite realms of creation forever and ever, creating and creating itself in perpetuity. Why then be concerned with the grass that blooms, withers, and dies in its season, only to grow once again due to the infinite love and light of the one Creator? This is the message we bring. Each entity is only superficially that which blooms and dies. In the deeper sense, there is no end to beingness. Wow. If you didn't get goosebumps, you're not paying attention. Maybe you don't have to get goosebumps, but that's inspiration. Um, I even forgot what Don asked. Yes, I think they just took the opportunity to insert, um, speaking of windows, a window to the essence of being. That window to the essence of being is, let's forget about, which group was positive, negative, or any of that. This is all specific information. You don't care about specific information. This is a beautiful way to invite those whose minds, I would say, are still even a little bit fascinated with transit information to move away from that. Maybe, just maybe, you know. Why? Why be concerned with the grass that blooms, withers, and dies in its season? Are they being nihilistic? Are they being, let's not enjoy the grass that blooms and the flowers and all that? No. Watch that which is making it grow. Watch that which is unknown. What makes a flower grow? Nobody knows. Yeah. Let things be the way they are and just enjoy it. There's a silent enjoyment of everything without thoughts. Last question, I think. Last question. So this is the question that was actually moved to, I see it now, session 32. Or not, maybe. I think so. It doesn't matter. It's here. So this is about sexual energy transfer, and the big switch in the topic is because it was Carla's question, and so Don asked it here. There's a little bit more before the question, which is Don, and I'll read it because this will refresh Don's intention to inquire into the law of one. And Don says, which I love this part. He says, as you have stated before, it is a straight and narrow path. There are many distractions. I plan to create an introduction, shall I say, to the law of one, traveling through and hitting the high points of this 75,000 year cycle, possibly a few questions into the general future. After this introduction to the law of one, as I call it, I would like to get directly to the main work, which is creating an understanding that can be disseminated to those who would ask for it, and only to those who would ask for it, for an understanding that can allow them to greatly accelerate their evolution. I am very appreciative of and feeling, I correct myself. I am very appreciative and feel it a great honor and privilege to be doing this and hope that we can accomplish this next phase. Now he moves to Carla's question. I have a question that the instrument has asked that I would like to ask for the instrument. She says, you speak of various types of energy blockages and transfers, positive and negative, that may take place due to participation in our sexual reproductive complex of actions. She states, please explain these blockages and energy transfers with emphasis upon what an individual seeking to be in accordance with the law of one may positively do in this area. Don asks, is it possible for you to answer this question? Ross says, it is partially possible, given the background we have laid. This is properly a more advanced question. Due to the specificity of the question, we may give general answer. The first energy transfer is red. It is random transfer. It is a random transfer having to do only with your reproductive system. The orange and the yellow ray attempts to have sexual intercourse create, firstly, a blockage if only one entity vibrates in this area, thus causing the entity vibrating sexually in this area to have a never-ending appetite for this activity. What these vibratory levels are seeking is green ray activity. There is the possibility of orange or yellow ray energy transfer, this being polarizing towards the negative, one being seen as object, rather than other self, then or the other seeing itself as plunderer or master of the situation. So, so far, these are the exchanges of energy that happen um, in sexual intercourse. There's a correction in the next paragraph. Good thing I saw it. So the first energy transfer is random and has to do with reproductive system. The way I see this is just um, making a baby. That's it. That's its purpose. Orange and yellow ray are um, blockages. There are what we call, it doesn't have to be, it could be move into the negative, as they say. Uh, and that's what they say at the end, which is manipulation of other and being the master. This is sort of like BDSM being probably just an introductory fun thing, to get into that idea, that mentality, exacerbating that, and I suppose just um, intensifying it would create more negative polarization. It's one of the ways in which we can polarize negatively. It's not meant, or it's not meant, it's not the only way that we can, but that's a possibility. Just like in the positive side, we can polarize through sexual intercourse. And that's what we're going to get into. But for now, speaking of orange and yellow ray, these two have to do with a lot of personality and building, personality. So ego and, self as controlling and so on. But it's not the only way of blockages, the way I understand it. I don't think it's said here very explicitly. Yes, other things may create a blockage in orange and yellow ray. And I'm not a specialist in this, so I'm not, don't, I don't think I have much to add there, but I know that that's not the only blockage. Because what we do know is that obviously that energy, sexual energy, is seeking love. And so it's moving up. But the negatives don't move it, obviously. For negative polarization, you can't move it to the heart. So the opposite is what is expressed, which is control and wanting to be controlled and so on. They continue and say, in fourth ray, I'm adding that there because they said third ray, but it's, this should be fourth. Actually, that was a correction that they made later on. So fourth ray, so heart chakra, there are two possibilities. Firstly, if both vibrate in third and or fourth ray, it's confusing. If they both vibrate in fourth ray, there will be a mutually strengthening energy transfer. The negative or female, here we're talking about metaphysical polarity, not just ethical polarity, behavioral polarity, but the negative and the positive. The negative or female, as you call it, drawing the energy from the roots of the beingness up through the energy centers, thus being physically revitalized. The positive or male polarity, as it is deemed in your illusion, finding in this energy transfer an inspiration which satisfies and feeds the spirit portion of the body mind spirit complex. Thus, both being polarized and releasing the excess of that which each has in abundance by nature of intelligent energy, that is, negative, intuitive, positive, physical energies, as you may call them. This energy transfer being blocked only if one or both entities have fear of possession, of being possessed, of desiring possession, or desiring being possessed. So that's the blockage at the end. The exchange here is between negative and positive, or female and male. And this brings to the male brings intuition, inspiration, to the female physical energy. There is a debate and discussion here if this is actual biological male and female, or if it's the metaphysical male and female. long ago, I stopped caring about that, and I have no opinions. So I have very little to say there. Some people would argue that is the biological female and male. Others will say that it is a metaphysical. I think that's just debate and doesn't bring us anywhere. So I don't do anything there. That's just what Ross said, and everybody interprets their own way. Continuing on, Ross says the other green ray possibility is that one entity offering green ray actually didn't talk about the blockage. And so if it's not explicit already, if there is a fear of possession or of being possessed, right? If you have a fear of possessing the other or being possessed, and this is just, your mind, I guess, or of desiring possession, I want to be yours, or desiring being possessed, I want you to be mine, I guess. That sort of, I guess there's a little bit of control there, isn't it? And so that may be a blockage for fourth ray transfer. And so now they speak of the other green ray possibility, and they say, is that of one entity offering green ray energy, the other not offering energy of the universal love? This resulting in a blockage of energy for the one not green ray, thus increasing frustration or appetite. The green ray being polarized slightly towards service to others. So this is the other possibility. The first one was if they both vibrate in fourth ray, and if now one does but the other doesn't, then the one that doesn't will have increased appetite, sexual appetite, frustration, and the other one slightly polarizing more towards service to others because it's providing that love. That makes a lot of sense. The Blu-ray energy transfer is somewhat rare among your people at this time, but is of great aid due to energy transfers involved in becoming able to express the self without reservation or fear. So that's the indication that a blue energy transfer has become has happened. And there is a greater desire to express the self without reservation of fear. I don't think this is that uncommon, but I guess it is. They mention it here. I think it's the others. Yeah, they say the indigo ray transfer is extremely rare among your people. This is the sacramental portion of the body complex, whereby contact may be made through the violet ray with intelligent infinity. No blockages may occur at these later two levels due to the fact that if both entities are not ready for this energy, it is not visible, and neither transfer nor blockage may take place. It is as though the distributor were removed from a powerful engine. The instrument was able, as an example of this working, to baffle the Orion group during something, tape blank, experiences, I guess sexual experiences, as you call this substance, due to the fact that it effectively completely open. Actually, no, this is not sexual. This is LSD. They must have mentioned something. That's the substance, and there's some mention about the LSD. And they talked about this already, how she was able to ignore the Orion group's suggestions. And that was due to the fact that it effectively completely opened other self to third ray, and they correct, green ray energy, and partially open other self to blue ray interaction. So that's, I guess they use that as an example, how Carla during the LSD experience, she had um, an open heart and was able to ignore the suggestion of the negative. And that's it. That's all we got for session 26. The last couple of questions are just um, making Carla cough and something else about LSD, which is not really that important for us. And I'm happy that we got through it in an hour, wasn't it?
Thank you very much, Gabriel. It was a very interesting and for me entertaining session because there's so many various information inside. For example, with a nuclear bomb, when I read the material the first time, I couldn't imagine that something in the physical world can so affect the metaphysical world, let me call it. But that is just indication that everything is connected with each other. And I don't want to interrupt you before, but my personal belief is where Ra speaks about that some spirits are getting lost during the Nagasaki and Hiroshima incident. I think here is, from my understanding, there's a meaning that when something is destroyed or transferred to the other energy, that may cause an imbalance to some other parts of the creation. That is my understanding that you may need to fix it to bring it back in shape as the usual energy has been. You may have some thoughts on that one.
No, that's completely out of my pay rate here. I It's difficult to fathom like how this happens, but um yeah, I was also when I first read it, it was shocking, to know that they say this, that there is a possibility of, losing that. I can only imagine some ways of how that may happen. But yeah, I guess, what I also wanted to point out is that in the grand scheme of things, there's no problem. It's just that it's a pity. It's a pity that we would lose something like that. It's almost like, when somebody's not enjoying the game and we're all playing, it's kind of like a pity. Nothing's being lost because it's just a game, you know. Person's not really what their anger or dissatisfaction is based on is something that is not even there, it's not tangible, but it's a pity that people would, you know, react that way. That's how I see it.
Thank you. I believe also I read in some other material that even the atomic impact have even a huge influence or a huge impact on the cosmic web, so called, because it caused also some imbalances in other part of the galaxy in that time. Anyway, enough from atomic situations. As usual, it was brought to us with some good intention for energy resources and misused and perverted as usual. So, if any participants have some comments or wanted to say something or ask questions regarding that session or related material, feel free to do so, or maybe raise your hand. Otherwise, we will continue. Yeah, also interesting is the first explanation of the energy transfer because that one is going deeper into it, I think, later in the material. Yeah, the follow-up questions from Ra as well. And do you think that do you have any example of that blue-ray energy transfer from your own experience, clients, customer? Like to share
Sure.
on
I don't
that?
think it's that complicated, actually. To me, Blu-ray um, is completely dependent on love. So when we're talking about sexual energy transfer, this breaching of separation between two entities, breaching, just dissolving of the illusion of separation, obviously through a self-conceived idea of two beings. when made through love and surrender, right? That's what's happening. Love must be obviously the driving force before this honest communication can be open. And so I think there is a very measurable way that we can see how we become a lot more honest through this interaction and is the desire to open to the self things, to the other self, things that we normally wouldn't. So the building of a relationship through love and honesty is just how much do we repress from our other half, let's say, for whatever reason. It's no judgment, just that we may feel like some things are not appropriate, to share. So how much of that is, and I wouldn't say, I mean, it's just that the sexual experience is so intense that it may open, those channels. But this is also happening in a relationship. It doesn't have to be with, and I think Ra talks about this just as a reference, so we don't have to pin it down to sexual um, intimacy. But just how much do we trust each other, in love and acceptance? And how much does that open yourself to express what you are, to be vulnerable, as we say? Like how often do we allow ourselves to be vulnerable in front of others? Um, and yeah, express that which is there. So I think opening the heart just allows that possibility. And yes, for those seeking or engaging in a relationship that obviously builds more the relationship through sex, then we can measure that. This did this relationship, this building on our activity in sex improve the possibility, of us being more honest and more open to each other, then I think that's a very measurable thing. Um, yeah, that would be my way of seeing it.
Thank you very much. It's a very good explanation. I like that. So, dear participants, if there are no further questions at this moment or comments, then I would ask Gabriel to give us some summarized closing words of this session and what we should do as homework for next week.
No comments, no questions. We have a quiet call today.
Yes, so impressed from your teaching. There are no questions are left.
It's not mine. I'm just a
You're
humble
not-
messenger of the humble messenger. I'm a relayer of a humble messenger of the teaching. Um, yeah, what really gets me all the time is when the simplicity of words just outline the process of everything. Because everything goes with these words of healing. And this is a very crucial part of my own work with people, with my own teaching, through the direct path. And is that healing is a function of knowing yourself. And then, of course, being yourself. That process of acceptance is healing. And even tied it in, like you can see how all of this is related, everything. That would be healing. Sexual energy transfer, on the positive sense, would be healing because it is a process of accepting the other one. And why this happens spontaneously as you are yourself, which doesn't require that you engage in any particular activity, only the remembering, only the constant checking in with reality of who you are Healing comes about naturally because when you see who you are, then you're able to let go. And I'm not going to say you're able. It's just, it becomes impossible not to let go. And in fact, it becomes very, um, it becomes unsustainable not to let go. And this is what is reported as dark nights of the soul, or, all these resistances, because it's becoming unbearable to sustain these things. And so in any case, healing, um, it's being called for in everybody. And it's just our ability to just honestly want to discern the truth of who we are in the moment. And that's what creates or paves the way for a joyful life. I'm just going to call it that. I use words like dharma, purpose, mission, just the joy of life. It so happens that as you enjoy life, other people's are affected by that, impacted by that. And service is a natural thing. In fact, what people call in you a service is just an unstoppable thing, something you can't stop doing. Like when you can't stop dancing to a music, you can't, You're not doing it for the entertainment of others. You're doing it because you just love dancing. Um, and that all comes with healing and acceptance. So those words, when they said healing is a function of acceptance, forgiveness, and when possible, restitution, which is a nice thing to do. Why not? I've done it many times whenever I can. I just text somebody or call somebody and just say, you know what, I I'm sorry, I love you. That's it. That's all I wanted to say. I do it a little bit more poetic and less confusing than that, but I think that's a nice thing to do. And one of the things that I recommend everybody really, um, text somebody today. Just we have this ability. Just why not? Look at your phone and see somebody who's there. You haven't said a nice thing. Why not? Just throw a nice thing. Send a picture, an old picture, something. It's it's an amazing impact, and yeah, it just brings that about in us. That's my suggestion for closing this. And yes, session 27, one of my favorites. So big time.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. So all of us are looking excited forward to session 27. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Your time is much appreciated. And see you next week.